We'll just wait 1 more minute and we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everybody. For those of you in the room and those who are joining online, for this setting on cross-cutting policies for a sustainable future. In this session, which I'm very happy to see, we only have 3 speakers because that will allow us an actual conversation and not just giving statements. So I'm very thrilled about that. What are we talking about here? We're going to be talking a little bit about the intersectionality between food production, biodiversity protection, nutrition, wider aspects of agriculture, and of course, climate change. As we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been an improvement in having some collaboration between those different aspects, which has been mainly happening, as far as I understand, at a grassroots level, at a national level, and less so at the international level. Historically, hasn't been great collaboration between World Health Organization, the FAO, and other institutions that should be working closer with the UNFCCC and other bodies. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what are some of the cross-cutting aspects, particularly of agriculture, and how can we make sure they get implemented going forward. One of the things that would be interesting to address is to look at what's happening here at 28, how that relates to the road going forward, and also how does the agriculture and climate space relate to some of the bigger things that have already been established, like the Paris Agreement, like the Global Biodiversity Framework. And from a multilateral level down to a national level, how does that fit together? How can we take what happens between global biodiversity and agriculture and climate change? How does that trickle down to NDCs, NBSAPs, and so forth? And how does that fit into the national roadmaps that the countries are trying to take forward? So those are some of the things we're going to be discussing here today. And I have 3 great speakers. I'm just going to introduce you now. To my far right, we have Dr. Cristina Tirado. Cristina works at the interface between science and policy related to climate change, health, food, and sustainable development, which is a good background to have for the conversation today. She works with with WHO, UNEP, UNFCCC, government, and NGOs worldwide. She has served as a WHO regional advisor in Europe and Latin America, scientist at the WHO Surveillance Program at the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment in Berlin. She's been the director of the PHI Center for Climate and Health in Oakland, an adjunct professor at the UCLA School of Public Health, affiliated with the UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability. And she's also the director of international climate initiatives at the LMU Center for Urban Resilience. And she also serves as in the secretariat of the Mediterranean Cities Climate Change Consortium. There's actually much more, but I'll leave it there because Cristina has been very busy. So as you can see, it's somebody with a lot of knowledge, particularly with the intersectionality of the issues we're going to be discussing here. To Cristina's left is Fabrizio Moriana. He is the executive director of Instituto Regenera. Regenera?
Regenera.
Regenera. Instituto Regenera. Regenera. So he's the executive director, and he's also a member of the Global Alliance for the Future of Foods cohort of leaders. I'll also get you to, when you take the floor, just you want to speak a little bit about your background as well.
Sure.
And then to Fabricio's left, we have Jess Smith from WWF UK. She's been with WWF UK for 2.5 years, largely focused on domestic advocacy with UK politicians. worked on a number of policy asks related to food systems, including engaging members of the House of Lords on food loss and waste, and lobbying ministers on minimizing the environmental impacts on the food the UK imports. She successfully amended the Financial Services and Market Act in the UK Parliament, so it accounted for nature and deforestation, which, if you don't know, that's a huge achievement. And she was with the first time this has been achieved in the UK. And she comes to the COP28 to ensure UK parliamentarians are being held to account, and the food systems approach on the agenda in the discussions. So the latter point has been achieved to some extent. I mean, it is up there, but as a lot of us have been discussing, how does it look when you look at the specific text, particularly the global stocktake, the global goal on adaptation, the Sharm el-Sheikh work, vis-a-vis the big declarations that are coming out, the Food Systems Declaration, the Emirates Declaration, and so forth. We're going to be discussing that much more now. So we're going to start with a little opening statement from each of the panelists, and then we're going to come into a conversation, and then we will have time for some discussions and Q&A at the end from those in here in the room. So, Christina, I want to start with you. Could you, in 3 minutes or less, just give us a little bit of your experience working in the interface between science and policy related to health, climate change, and sustainable development, and maybe speak a little bit how to how you support health and well-being in the policies by integrating a food systems approach. So how can food link these aspects together? Over to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity of being with you and discuss this. So how I do through the systems thinking. So we think that the thinking through the food system is very integrative, but it's not. So I try to think about all the aspects that were affecting health and well-being, and then I have been trying to put systems together with water systems, with ecosystems, and all the variation of ecosystems like agro ecosystems, landscapes together. Also with the social systems, and this is something that we cannot leave in one side. It's almost impossible when you work with certain groups in the UN or sectors to put together all the biological systems with the social systems. And we have seen this through the UN Food System Summit. I mean, I was feeling totally in silos, and we were super integrative. I mean, the effort was super integrative, and I was feeling that many things were left in silos. So all the social protection systems or urban systems, they have to go together hand by hand. So it's, I think it's there when we put transport systems, the energy systems, when you put together everything, you start to get a little bit of health benefits that are visible. And well-being, definitely. Everything came right? So I think I leave it there, and maybe we can continue talking later. That will be good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that opening. And it's a really good segue to you, Fabricio, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the enabling conditions that you think are necessary in order to implement a food systems approach in policymaking and achieve multiple objectives. So the intersectionality between food, nutrition, farmer support, and so forth. How do you see that, particularly in your work in Brazil, but also how you see it playing out in the conversations here at COP?
First, I would say that adding to Christina, I had the chance to go to WHO Pavilion to present there for the first time. And I believe I have a friend now in the Austrian health group here at COP. And the most intriguing object to me is that they were talking about everything else and not directly about, medicines. Yeah. And that was amazing to see, because you actually have to think of all the environment for people not to use the health system. So it's amazing the way they are dealing with that. The conditions of possibility, which I think are basic. I mean, very biased by the fact that I come from a food producing country. So actually, that makes us kind of all the directions, like agribusiness, agroecology, everything happens in Brazil somehow. So there we understand that food that we eat every day comes in a very strict roadmap, which is like there is subsidies, there is infrastructure for delivering this food, there is rent plays a super important role, either if the people are accessing or not. So we are also coming to the public policies which are connected to fighting against starvation and hunger. So if we were to list all the policies, we would be here until the end of COP. But actually, I would name mainly that food systems in are based on subsidies, especially to the wrong place. And we also have very nice policies for public procurement for smallholder farmers, for agroecology consumption in the public level, which means we can deliver organic food to children, paying a little bit more for the farmers, so it's fair, and at the same time making it more democratic. And we are also, unfortunately, striving against hunger. So we are also now joining forces in a way that we can deliver nutritious food, not only food to those who are at risk of starvation. And that is a new discussion too, which might help the other 700 million people in the world. We unfortunately have 30 million people at this risk in Brazil today in a food producing country. So I would talk much more, but I think I can follow after. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, they all
talk about the GAF, but I would.
Okay, yeah. We'll come back to that. And then these are some really strong statements to kind of like help set the scene. And also now I want to come to you, Jess. And we already heard a little bit about the work you've been doing on the ground in the UK, working on domestic politics. So maybe you could talk a little bit about WWF in the UK, like the work you do there, and also a little bit about some of the policy measures and recommendations on food systems that you see are leaking into climate change and biodiversity.
Thank you. Yeah, so in my work in the UK, I engage a lot with parliamentarians kind of across the political spectrum, and that's kind of more my day job. I've also been out here kind of following negotiations around food systems, so I'm going to try and talk about both in the high level and then how the implementation really works on in the parliamentary system, which can often be a bit of a struggle. But maybe just to talk about the kind of policy entry points for action. First of all, maybe it would be remiss of me not to talk about the NDCs in particular, the country's climate plans on how they plan to cut emissions and adapt to climate impacts. So within those NDCs that each country has to have, there's many a mention of agriculture, the agriculture sector in NDCs. However, very few set targets in relation to food systems itself. Whether that's the aspects of food loss and waste reduction, transportation of food itself, and the emissions that brings. And I think a report by the FN recently found agriculture and food feature in 94% of countries' NDCs when looking at adaptation, 86% when looking at mitigation. But again, that's still in the very kind of like narrow productionist sense. Only a handful refer to the food systems approach. And this is true of the UK's NDC, for example. So we'd really like to see by 2025, 100% of change, a step change in that regard, so that the systemic approach in the next round of NDCs is properly represented. This would actually bring a lot of co-benefits, again, thinking back to that broader international setting, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, and the CBD as well. So beyond climate action, which is SDG 13, many of these opportunities contribute to activities that are needed, the sector to continue feeding a growing global population, for example. So that's eradicating hunger, SDG 2, and directly contribute to working towards responsible consumption and production patterns, which is the SDG 12. And then one other point, just on the kind of topic of the day, maybe, which is the global stocktake, the GST. This will be the de facto kind of cover text of COP, really the defining outcome. And at present, food systems language just isn't present in it at all, which is really disappointing. But as far as I know, the latest version of the text is due to drop today and it hasn't dropped yet, unless the last 20 minutes. Okay, so maybe that will change in the next couple of hours, and I really hope it does. I think that's a really key opportunity to get food systems language into the defining text of the COP, which means that it will be able to kind of be advanced going forward next year. And at COP30, which is held in Brazil, it's going to be a food COP. Everyone's already saying it. If we don't have that food systems language now as a basis, I think it will really struggle going forward. And so I look forward to hopefully seeing that changed in the coming hours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jess. And let's not forget Azerbaijan as well. Even though it's not labeled as a food COP, and then also it's not going to be as important as from an NDC perspective, let's see what we can do there as well. Christine, I want to come to you now. You heard a little bit about what Jess was talking about, the importance of ensuring that with the food aspects are not just mentioned in the NDCs, but actually it is linked to policy action. And Fabrício was talking a lot about the dichotomy of nations like Brazil, where you have a massive food production, but there's still hunger in the country because there's this schism between the commodity market and producing food for the people. Given your experience working intersectionality in climate change, food production, nutrition, and biodiversity production, can you share some thoughts on what you heard so far?
Thank you, Anna. If you don't mind that I come to the previous Lula.
Really?
There's a lot of me, so I am embarrassed, but very proud I was there. So, you know, the famous zero, and what you say it because now you have a very honest government. That food insecurity, that level of food insecurity, we have it in other countries, and you know, maybe more, 40, and they really don't care and don't say it this way. During the Lulas, I don't know why everybody forgot that it was through agroecology they were supplying the schools with local farmers. And it was even, you know, they were neglecting the fact that it was agroecological way of growing food. So for me, it has been the most, together with Bolsa Familia, procurement and the acquisition programs. And it has been exported easily to other countries, together with all the school feeding programs. From these projects, from the local aspect point of view, cannot imagine how healthy was the diet. Everybody complains in Brazil, in Rome, in many places, but we have to see what they have. In every single school in Brazil, during not the best times, they have a nutritionist in the school. And the diet for kids is quite plant-based. They have different energy requirements. I mean, everybody's different, but it's so healthy, the diets in the schools. So I think it's through all these being together social protection plans that we can get something really an impact on health and also on co-benefits to the environment. At the community level, you can see this easily. 10 years of USAID working on global health planning.
Universal.
It's amazing. And you see an improvement in the local environment and in the diets and in the health. And you measure health and you get health co-benefits. So at the science policy level, I have seen that the best shot that we have right now, I invite you to comment on this, is the new IPBES is like a platform for biodiversity like IPCC. And there is a new Nexus assessment, climate change, energy, then food, water, health, biodiversity. And we have been leading the climate change and energy. Yes. And I invite you to comment and review. People are super open. Indigenous and local knowledge is across all the chapters. We miss something, we will include it. And imagine if they are open, that I propose, I am just in one chapter, a technical chapter, and I propose to have a food systems chapter with indigenous knowledge, use all the chapters, and they say yes. So, comment is out there until January. And I think it's an opportunity to bring actual case studies and knowledge to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Es verdad.
We'll come to Fabricio and just in just a second. Just want to say for the people who are in the room, there will be time for some Q&A. So you get your questions ready. Consider this the session of everything you ever wanted to know about food and climate, but we're afraid to ask. This is the time to do it. There's just a little group of us here. Like, don't worry, it's been live streamed. Just who's in the room. So keep those questions ready in about 5 to 10 minutes time. So I want to come to Fabricio and Jess. Fabricio first. Now you hear a little bit about the thoughts from Christina, particularly how we can use some cross-cutting aspects, in this case, indigenous food systems production, to kind of bridge the gap between the different aspects. How do you think that could work for you? And particularly, how can you take some of the multilateral conversations happening here and apply them at a national level?
Okay. First of all, I really loved what you just told. Please invite me to this conversation. That was amazing. Yeah, no, but really, we have to do this nexus, and I think the cross-cutting experiences we have there that we should bring. As you mentioned, several examples we had. But we also had an issue with the rent. As rent lowered, the access to food lowered too. So now we are rebuilding this capacity. And we're moving to the country in terms of what you produce. We are losing. We're producing less and less food that people eat every day, rice, beans, and so on. And we are producing a lot of soy, So we have a problem to solve. And that is something that we have that is built on top of several policies which are very interesting, but we have to make it better. So I will mention one example that I love. I really, really love. It is about the program you told. So in Brazil, for those who don't know, then we have a program for city administrations to get federal money and applying the local level, so they can buy from farmers in the local level. But when you reach indigenous populations, that's kind of different because, sanitary issues, production expectations, everything has to meet because you have children to be fed. But we notice by the time of COVID that we have to open way for those people already producing in these communities, and I'm talking about indigenous food, to feed their indigenous populations in the schools. So there is an amazing work being done now for technical notes on how can you apply that locally. And that is the type of social technology we have to export. I mean, I see it going on. It's so beautiful because indigenous people don't want packaged food coming from elsewhere. I mean, they want their own food. And they're just doing what is, to me, the most obvious thing. But applying that as public policy is very hard. So, that is something that should be even in our NDCs. How can we respect more their traditional knowledge in these terms, in terms of food? And that is not in our NDC. Our NDC has very little ambition in these terms. It was forged in a far-right government, and it has to be rewritten. That is what we want. And just to add to what you just said, I'm here because of the leaders cohort from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And their intention, I think, is about, we all know in here that diversity is a subject at COP. So we have 45 leaders from the global South coming with this cohort. And the idea is that they themselves can go to the negotiations and make pressure for what we need. And I'm very proud to be part of this group because the infrastructure is just amazing for us to vocalize, go to negotiations, policy briefings, and all the other support as friends that they are becoming. It's the second time I come, so it's just for you. Thanks.
Thanks, Fabricio, and thanks for the shout out for that cohort as well. So I wanted to come to you just now, and you heard a little bit about the overarching lines from Christina, and a little bit of how Fabrizio sees it on the ground in Brazil, particularly vis-a-vis NDCs and the reality of what gets in the NDCs and what actually happens on the ground. So now the UK is quite a different context and very different system in many ways. Talk a little bit to how you see some of those aspects coming up there.
Yeah, I guess firstly, a key difference, we don't have that same Indigenous community in the UK that we have to be conscious of in quite the same way. Although it's worth saying that there is a vocal, I would say, minority of farmers in the UK who have farmed for generations, and it's like a saying in the UK, it's like not everyone farms, but everyone knows a farmer, and everyone's very protective in the UK of a certain way of farming that is perhaps quite unproductive, uses a lot of land, maybe a few sheep. And people love that. They love it so much. They love the rolling hills, the pasture, even though we know that the emissions from that are really destructive. And I think there's a real challenge for us to combat that kind of narrative in order to change the way we farm. I don't think we really have a choice in the UK. We will be, as many countries will, impacted by climate change. And I think there is a lot to be said for changing how we farm and what we're growing. So one kind of like light in the dark, I would say, in this aspect is a policy that the UK is actually implementing called ELMS, which is the Environmental Land Management Schemes. So this came about because everyone may be familiar with Brexit, which did happen. And this the kind of silver lining, as every political party, or most in the UK likes to say, from that was we got to leave CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union, which people don't really like very much. It pays farmers for owning land and not really for much. And so when we left the European Union to step away from that kind of basic payment scheme, and we needed something new. And I was quite pleased that what they ultimately came up with was the sustainable farming initiatives, which really kind of turned that notion on its head and said, actually, farmers need to now begin to show how when they're farming in a sustainable way, and we'll pay them for that. And came up with this kind of phrase of public money for public goods, which meant that, it was recognized that farmers do play like a crucial role in the UK, both from like a identity standpoint and providing that food. But they also have a very responsibility for their land, and most farmers know that and want to farm in a more sustainable way, but simply weren't able to because they didn't have the money. And so under ELMS, which I won't say it's perfect, WWF thinks the budget for it should be at least doubled, and the implementation has been, unsurprisingly, not very fast. But I think there's a lot of potential there, changing the way that farming is done in the UK, rethinking kind of what farming should be in the UK. So it's really, really quite an exciting space.
Thank you so much. And it's a really interesting space to be in, right? Because often we talk about what are the changes needed as we step into some kind of collaboration. In the UK's case, it was what happens when you step out of a regional collaboration? What are the opportunities and the pitfalls for that? Thanks for bringing the Brexit into the conversation. I think that's great. I just wanted to ask one more question to you guys before we get to hear if there are any questions from the audience, and then we come back to like a final question. So what I wanted to ask you, like, how can we take this down a step? Now we talked about the overarching lines, Brazil, UK, and the intergovernmental, the multilateral negotiation spaces. When you look at it from a top-down versus a bottom-up approach, what do we concretely need to do? When you go to speak to a politician, when you go to do your lobbying with the Brazilian delegates here, and you go to the UK delegates, and you go and talk to WHO or whoever, well, you don't talk to yourself, right? But if you go to, we all do. If you go and try to convince somebody, what specifically needs to happen very concretely? How do we take this very huge, very multilateral process and turn it into also connected with what's happening in some countries at a national and a local level, and other places, mainly the national and the local level? How can we build those bridges? How can a farmer get into this room and say, how does the GST relate to me? What measures do we need to do? What do we tell the decision makers? Christina, do you want to go first?
Thank you. This is the question, the $1 million. This is a translation from Spanish, but anyway, this is something, I don't know if I am responding your question, but this is what responds my question, talking to myself. And all these years in IPCC, now in IPBES, and seeing how here don't solutions the scientists are being saying for so many years are integrated. And we are saying that there is no time, long time ago, and we are still, adaptation, come on. We have, if you read the IPCC, don't read everything. Chapter adaptation 18, chapter 18, health. If you look for my box that I saved, that we wrote with mitigation and adaptation, and it's everything about integration. There is no way that we can separate these things. We are not working okay in this way. You can see, and IPCC has been saying this, we don't make it, we don't arrive, we don't reach the people, we don't reach the targets unless we now take, this is a definition, okay? Not just some words that Christine is saying is all the resilient development pathways were defined by IPCC and IPBES, like pathways that integrate adaptation and mitigation, goals of sustainability. And then we have been adding all the equity and justice aspects that were totally forgotten. So it's the only way that we can make it. And way with this separation. And by the way, we have analyzed all the NDCs, NAPs, and from the PNAPs, from the NAPAs, from the NAMAs, we have information on resilience, indicators of resilience. And it's a database that we have with UCLA available to all NGOs, governments, and whatever you want. We have people speaking in many languages and provide this information, but it's integration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Yes.
Maybe just 1 minute.
Sure.
Yeah.
It might take more than 1 minute, but it's
1.5.
yeah, okay. It's so little story. When I started my master's, I started studying a participatory process there in Brazil for reshaping an urban law. Everyone that was taking part in this participatory process would say, but that doesn't change anything. They were taking part in it. So that was challenging, how can you take part in it and you believe it's not changing anything? So how are COPs not doing anything if we are all in here, if 80,000 people? That's kind of these questions. So I truly believe that we have a participatory process that was established in the Constitution of 1988 in Brazil, which is very exemplary for what could be a way to build in higher levels. For example, in the following months, we are going to have a national conference on food security and climate. There will be a sector discussing climate together with food security in the country that has to solve its problems with starvation. So it can be done together with civil society, and it came from cities, state level, national level, and there were even the free conferences which you could organize through Zoom. And they are considering that. They are going to build the policy on top of that. Problem is when the executive power, so government in charge, listens to that, what are they going to listen? What are they going to translate into policies? What is coming to the NDCs? Because the innovation is down there. It's on the ground. We see it every day. So I really believe this participatory process is kind of hard to follow because it's very demanding. We have to be here and we have to not lose faith when things don't go our way. But we have to keep on building it as institutions. So that's, I would say.
Great. Thank you so much. Jess, any thoughts?
Maybe just 2 small points. When it comes to kind of the implementation of these very large, lofty ideas, as you say, I think maybe also there's a bit of a knowledge gap between what we know, what you guys and probably your colleagues will know, and what within our countries people actually know about these summits that really prevents action from being taken. And I mean in terms of parliamentarians as well. CBD, for example, we did quite a lot of work on as WWF, and we're really pleased with kind of the GBF outcome. But when it comes to implementing that in the UK, I'm not convinced that our parliamentarians truly comprehend what was agreed to and what needs to be done on the local level to really go from ambition to action ultimately. And I think that's probably going to be true of the outcome here as well. For example, I met with a cohort of UK MPs yesterday who made the time to come here, which was really good, and they're really keen to learn. But we were talking to them, and they really didn't know much at all about the process, about the kind of place for food in the summit. They were like, why isn't food being discussed in, like, the major decisions, like where's the place for food? And I had to kind of explain that there was the joint work last week and it didn't go very well. But there was just, like, I think, big knowledge gap prevents that implementation from happening, which, to be honest, is a bit of a worry, because these targets don't just exist for fun. Like, we do need to actually get on and implement them. So yeah, I think that's my main actually.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. So now we just have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we move into some of the closing remarks. So is there anybody who conjured up something you want to ask the panel? Please state your name and affiliation and who the question is directed to.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vilma Sandström. I'm a food system researcher from Aalto University, Finland. And thank you for the very interesting discussion. And my question is about dietary change, especially from like highly animal-based diets towards plant-based diets. As it's not maybe like it's not there in the NDCs. It's not happening. So how do you have any good examples of policies? How do we make that change happen? Because it has so much power to change also the future food systems.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that question. Maybe we can start the reversed order. We have Jess replying first.
Yeah, great question. Something that we as WGF have done a lot of thinking about, and have some suggestions about specifically. There's no examples of this in the UK in terms of what's happened, but we have many a suggestion for them. You can look up our affordable food report for ideas. Some examples are kind of like subsidies on fruit and veg, for example. We also have some ideas around making school meals within the UK more plant-based. And there's a lot of kids in the UK on free school meals because usually, if for context, you have to pay for your school meals at school. But there's plenty of children in the UK who are in food poverty, and so they get them for free. And we think that, for example, making plant-based school meals more widely accessible is an option. But in general, kind of like on the more general vision of things, I think we would just say that meat consumption in the global north needs to decrease in our diets, and that's an inevitable conclusion from that discussion.
Great. Anybody else want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Adding to what she has mentioned, and linking with your idea of cities, we have seen this working with cities. I will not go very far away. In Santa Monica. Santa Monica, they decide it's a very socialist small city next to, nobody knows that small city next to LA. But they are a very wealthy populations and super poor, like without house, like thousands that come from all the US. Santa Monica is socialist and food and meals and libraries super high end for everybody. The way of doing the policies, both LA and Santa Monica have a sustainability office, City Hall, that has food council or food policy council that are amazing. And nothing is down. Everything is the other way around. So we are talking about farmers producing food. Maybe they cannot avoid some fertilizers, but they don't use pesticides. It's maybe organic, but it's agroecology. With the best that they can do, they call it good food and good procurement. Just every 2 years, they have been reducing the amount of meat to 15%. Public procurement. And they can increase this. It was just like the first trial. And the food was local, and it's called a good food purchasing program. And it has rights for employment indicators, And it has been done by farmers and producers. So I think this is a good example, of course, to dietary guidelines that have been just changed in the north. So.
We should just briefly.
Yeah, and I'm only bringing one example to make it complex from the global south. We have a public procurement program that is used in all the municipalities. And we have a country which is one of the biggest meat producers in the world, and that fights against starvation of. You can imagine the type of resistance there is in change in these diets when sometimes the best meal on the day is served at schools. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this change. We have to do. We will be obligated to do so. But the thing is, we have to think on terms of climate justice on who should be, should have to take meat away from their dietary options first, because we are dealing with people who are in starvation. And as Paulo Freire said, you can only talk to people that is on starvation in terms of bread. So you have to deliver food, and you have to deliver nutritious food that you have access to. Brazil has some guidelines on nutritious food, which are exemplary all over the world. And most of it is pretty much saying fresh vegetables, fresh food, as fresh as you can, and no ultra processed food. So that is another way that we are doing dietary changes in Brazil.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Fabricio. We have to wrap up in a second. I'm just going to ask you for one final thing. 10 seconds, and really just 10 seconds, Gigi. If you mention just one thing, one aspect, element that you feel is overlooked in the big conversations about policy setting around cross-cutting issues, one element you would put more emphasis, gun to the head by a decision maker saying, you have one choice, what do you choose? 10 seconds, Jess first.
Food systems in the GST. Tell everyone. I'm done.
Great, Fabricio.
We translate into policies, indigenous people.
Christina.
From the greenwashing. Yes, and talk about ethics, please. Face it.
So it seems that we landed on cross-cutting issues as well, greenwashing, indigenous food systems,
Yes.
and the GST, how that should be interlinked.
Yes.
And with that, we have to wrap up now. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much to Humane Society International and Columbia Global Centers for organizing this event, and have a continued great day.